Good morning, Dan and Amy. We talked about it earlier in the week. Alyssa Finley had a good piece in the Wall Street Journal about this study published in the Lancet, which is, I guess, otherwise a respected medical journal in the UK, that found that hydroxychloroquine is harmful. And this was, of course, trumpeted by the Washington Post and the D.C. press corps because since Trump had trumpeted it, the press corps had to push back as hard as they can to say, no, it's dangerous, it's wrong, he's wrong because he's always wrong and he's dangerous.
Orange man bad.
Basically. After the study was published suggesting that hydroxychloroquine is harmful, in an open letter to the Lancet's editors and the study's authors, some 120 doctors, statisticians, and epidemiologists write that the headlines about the study have caused considerable concern to participants and patients enrolled in randomized controlled trials evaluating the drugs. Oh, remember them? So they raised methodological as well as data integrity concerns. They wanted to have these studies authors show their work, and the Lancet was not forthcoming. There was also, when it was forthcoming, an admission by the data outfit that they used, a Chicago company called Surgisphere, that they had made mistakes. They noted, for instance, that a hospital in Asia was lumped in with Australian death totals. The study said the average reported dose of hydroxychloroquine was 100 milligrams higher than the FDA guidelines. So, as Finley wrote, the data, two possibilities from that: either the data is inaccurate, or doctors were treating patients with dangerously high doses, which would skew the studies, would skew the results, and thus perhaps provide important context to the study in terms of its importance for guidance. There's so much swirling around. People won't want to enter those trials, said David Smith, an infectious disease specialist at the University of California, San Diego, in which case it will be an open question that won't get answered, right? I mean, HCQ, hydroxychloroquine, is been approved for emergency use, and so it's a patient-doctor decision.
Right.
But there are clinical trials ongoing to see if it would be an effective antiviral, and you know, the results have been decidedly mixed. So as we've said on this show many a time, okay, so emergency use, if the FDA thinks emergency use and for COVID-19, and then let's see what the trials produce. It's just like the position we took with remdesivir and anything else. But politics seems to have insinuated itself into this area of science, too, sadly. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Miriam Mendelson. She's a Ph.D. social science researcher and licensed clinical mental health counselor. Dr. Mendelson, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Dan.
You have intervened in this discussion as well, in part because you want to have New York Governor Andrew Cuomo rescind his ban on hydroxychloroquine in the state of New York.
Yes, absolutely.
And the basis for that?
You know, I come at this from a couple of different perspectives. Actually, I'd say three. First of all, as a mental health counselor, so my background is in research and policy analysis. That's my PhD background. I've studied international policy analysis in general. But I also hold a license as a clinical mental health counselor in the state of New York. And currently, my gig, if you would put it that way, is I work as a counselor with vulnerable communities in New York City. And for that reason, I have been in really close contact. I would call it heart-to-heart contact with people in vulnerable communities, poor communities, largely Black and brown communities. And I've spoken to people sometimes daily who have lost multiple people in their family, okay? People who have suffered devastating losses. And on the level of colleagues. I had one woman who worked in corrections. She lost 10 of her colleagues, 2 of whom were partners. So the losses that I have seen really up close and personal have been absolutely devastating. So that's from one perspective. From another perspective, I have an immediate relative who works as actually as a hospital chaplain in one of the main hospitals in New York City, and works with the families of the bereaved. And lastly, I am personally acquainted with a physician who has treated people who were sick with coronavirus in New York and has unfortunately had to do it almost in secrecy for the simple reason, and saved lives, by the way, all ages, mildly ill, severely ill, and has had to do so in secrecy for the simple reason that there is still an executive order in effect. It was put in place on the 23rd of March by Andrew Cuomo that bans pharmacies from filling hydroxychloroquine prescriptions written by doctors if they are for coronavirus patients, which is, it's mind-boggling. So you can see the cognitive dissonance when I'm talking daily to people that are suffering these devastating losses. And I know that there is a drug that when used particularly early on, definitely with zinc, because hydroxychloroquine potentiates zinc. That's the whole point of it. It makes pathways for zinc to go through the cell membranes and stop the virus from replicating. So the hero there is really the zinc. The hydroxy just enables it, facilitates it. I know that there's this drug out there that has been shown to be helpful in many cases. You know, we can debate the statistics, how many, whatever. It has been shown to be helpful. And I know that these poor people in vulnerable communities will never see this drug.
Well,
unless, if they're in a hospital, if they're at death's door, God forbid, when it's already not effective and without the zinc. I'm sorry, I went on and on. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. So Governor Cuomo, he's banned hydroxychloroquine from the entire state of New York. How are you getting it in there to help people?
Well, okay. So the person I know who is a physician, so I'm not a medical doctor, okay? I'm a PhD researcher, a social scientist, and I'm also a clinical counselor. The physician that I know has a small local pharmacy whose name shall remain obviously unmentioned, who will, you know, don't ask, don't tell,
Yeah, that's fine.
will fill prescriptions for hydroxychloroquine. The large pharmacy chains, I've called them. I've called the pharmacy chains just to see if this is in fact still in effect. And yes, they will tell you, we cannot fill your prescription unless you have arthritis or lupus, unless the patient has arthritis or lupus, or unless you are in a clinical trial. In a clinical trial for coronavirus means you're in the hospital already deathly ill when it's not going to be effective, not using zinc, and the small number of people in the clinical trial means all of those communities, all of those people that are not in that trial, which the trial itself is not going to be very effective for the reasons that I just said, but everyone else who's not in a clinical trial is basically condemned to a roll of the dice.
So
they live maybe, they die maybe. What's that?
You weren't surprised when it turned out that, according to his doctors, Trump's usage of a hydroxychloroquine regimen did not have any deleterious impact on his health, as was warned would happen by many members of the press corps when he announced that he had been on such a regimen.
You know, we don't even, Trump is N equals 1, okay? That is a sample size of 1.
Right.
There are thousands and thousands and thousands of people, thousands, who take hydroxychloroquine every day for chronic conditions like arthritis and lupus. We have a huge data set of people who are not suffering deleterious effects, who are not dying in bunches. You know, President Trump was one single high-profile case, But logically speaking, again, I come at this as a researcher. I look at data, I look at logic. There are thousands and thousands of people who take it every day. Let me just tell you something. The reason why I'm getting on the show with you today is very simple. For me, it's not about politics at this point. If I didn't have to counsel people every day, and I could simply sit with a sign in Albany in front of the State House every time Cuomo walks in saying, please lift the ban. There is no issue with shortages at this point. We've gotten, 26, we just gave 2 million, was it 2 million doses to Brazil? We donated.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. We've gotten something like 26 million doses from India. The dose for coronavirus is 2 pills a day for 5 days. That is 10 pills. Okay. There is no shortage issue here. My purpose here is simply to shed some light on the existence of the executive order. This exists in other states, but in New York, where I am, number one, the death toll is the highest, and number two, the restriction is also the strictest.
Yeah, but
So it says,
I know you don't want to get into politics, and I'd be
political.
happy not to as well when we're talking about science. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that's possible, and thus the need for these authors to retract their study. At least that's one possible explanation. But not only was the study on hydroxychloroquine pulled, the New England Journal of Medicine also pulled an article by the same authors of the hydroxychloroquine study on heart disease and COVID-19. These are medical doctors from Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and and I wonder, as a researcher yourself, as a clinical researcher, is it possible that they were just that sloppy and then unwilling to sort of initially cop to their sloppiness? Or do you think that there was politics afoot? Do you have any insight into how this could come about, especially to be published in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet? Where's the peer review? Where's the editorial review?
It's definitely, politics is always a part of a picture whenever you talk about government policy, whenever you talk about people's reactions to new ideas. Absolutely. People and where they stand politically or where they stand ideologically is also going to have absolutely an effect. Mm-hmm. In terms of what people said when for example, the executive order by Andrew Cuomo, no pharmacist shall dispense hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine except when written as prescribed for an FDA-approved indication, i.e. arthritis or lupus or malaria, or as prescribed as part of a clinical trial related to COVID-19, which means everybody outside of that trial is condemned. The original justification was because of shortages. Okay, so it's not a request, almost pleading to Andrew Cuomo is, this is a moment where you can show leadership. There is no issue of shortages. The dosage for coronavirus is tiny. It's 10 pills. When given with zinc, it's been shown to be effective. A Yale epidemiologist, Dr. Harvey Risch, mm-hmm. just came out saying that hydroxychloroquine with zinc in early stages of illness is effective. The American Association of Physicians and Surgeons reviewed 2,333 cases and had 2,137, that's about 91%, improved on hydroxychloroquine. I'm hoping that zinc was also in there. So the positive data is in. The shortages are no longer an issue, but whatever the reason why that was done in the beginning, okay? I'm here because I want lives to be saved. I'm tired of people here.
I mean, that decision should be between the doctor and the patient, and not a governor of a state. And clearly this is political because President Trump came out and admitted that he's taking hydroxychloroquine.
So at this point, right, at this point, whatever the justification was seen to be, okay, at this point, the time for leadership is here. Let Andrew Cuomo lift the ban. let those decisions be now between doctors and their patients. Like I say, if there was something wrong with the drug on its face, we would see people, with arthritis, lupus, malaria, dropping like flies. They aren't. The U.S. military uses it all the time and has for years and years and years.
Yeah, VA said that.
There
yeah.
isn't a safety issue.
I-
It's really time to lift the ban. Yeah, please.
As a licensed clinical mental health counselor as well, the mental health impacts of the policies, particularly the lockdown, there were a group of doctors in Northern California who said the other week that they have seen more suicides in the last month than they normally see in a year. And I wonder what your experience has been in terms of perhaps the heightened incidence of mental health crises, patients with mental health crises that you're treating.
Let me just say like this. The people that I speak to, and like I say, my particular work, I work for a government agency. I don't want to, I'm not here to like blow the whistle on people, but I counsel people every day from vulnerable communities. And I'm going to tell you, this is going to sound ironic. Okay. It's a little bit of a dark statement. They don't have the luxury of committing suicide, these people. Okay. These are people who have multiple family members dying, and they are the one holding the family together. They have young children. They themselves are sick. Okay. So yes, I definitely think that the lockdown has put tremendous pressure on people, and I'm sure it's increased suicides or suicidal thinking, and that's tragic. The people I speak to, they're simply dealing with death all the time. And like I said, one woman, 10 of her colleagues died, 2 of whom were partners that she worked with. I'll tell you just one story. A woman, she spoke about her, I think it was her aunt, first it was her great uncle or her uncle, I forgot which one, went into the hospital, was on a respirator. Again, no chance to get a hold of these drugs that could have saved his life. In a hospital, on a respirator, was told that the respirator was needed for younger, healthier patients, was taken off the respirator, and he died. Okay. Then her aunt heard the story about the uncle. They weren't married. It was 2 related people, and said, heck no, I'm not going into the hospital. She got coronavirus, stayed out of the hospital. Again, no access to these medications, and she died. Okay. And that's a typical story in the sense of multiple family members. So yes, I get that suicide and mental health issues are an increasing problem because of extended lockdowns and people, knowing sick family members, et cetera, whatever. The people I know, they're dealing with death directly. It's not an issue of suicide. It's an issue of desperately holding families together that have suffered multiple losses, which is why I'm speaking out in any way I can and just saying, Cuomo, the time for leadership is here. Please lift the ban. Please rescind the executive order.
Well, I hope he listens. She is Miriam Mendelson, PhD, social science researcher, licensed clinical mental health counselor. Miriam Mendelson, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan and Amy, thank you both for having me. I hope it makes a difference.
Me too.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
A storm is on the horizon, and you need to keep the lights on no matter what. Your business relies on the power being on 24/7. It's the lifeblood of your data and computer systems. Weather-related outages from the power company are not acceptable. Your need for a source of power that's reliable 24/7, along with round-the-clock service that can dispatch technicians to your site immediately, is mission critical. Your business needs Charles Equipment Energy Systems on speed dial. These are the big boys, not residential.